Having me.
Are European governments aware of the links between the NGOs they're funding and the PFLP?
Well, these links are hardly a secret. It's all open information. So I would say that yes, they are aware.
And how do you explain, therefore, the absence of due diligence in providing these sums to organizations affiliated with people they themselves say are terrorist groups?
Well, that is exactly the question we are putting now to the European governments. We think that terrorism is not only an Israeli problem, it's definitely a European problem at this point, and we think that they should definitely freeze and reevaluate all this funding and only pending an investigation continue the funding.
But to date, what do you think explains their willingness to continue giving funds that I assume, according to open source material, is linked to terror groups?
Well, that is a good question. Well, all assistance to terrorist groups is prohibited, meaning these are designated terrorist groups. So this is a very good legal question, which we need answers to and currently don't have them.
Are there legal options that citizens in these countries might be able to take, or Israel itself, to force the EU to stop funding these organizations?
Well, there have been attempts by other organizations to do so, like Shuat ad-Din and other groups. At this point, what the governments say is that as they don't see direct ties to violence, they don't see a reason to stop funding these groups. This is Australia, for instance.
Australia says it hasn't seen any direct links to violence.
That's
okay.
True.
I presume that NGO Monitor has approached a number of these governments to raise its concerns?
We have now. We are still awaiting responses.
So over the years, they haven't responded at all to various allegations of unsavory groups to which they're linked?
That's true.
You note in your report that the EU knows that that human rights NGOs are susceptible, they're highly at risk when it comes to money laundering, and yet they continue giving funds to them. Is it possible for governments to know with 100% certainty that there aren't any unsavory links to the groups they're funding? Is that a reasonable expectation?
I think the United States is actually a good example of this. The United States does not fund these NGOs because some of them are affiliates of the PFLP or have PFLP activists in them. They just don't fund them. So the US is very careful with this, and that's actually an example that the Europeans should follow. It is very difficult to ascertain if there is direct terrorist activities going on through these NGOs, but as we said, any material assistance to a terrorist organization is prohibited.
Josh, are we talking about one terror group that has managed to sneak its way into the human rights network, or is this the tip of the iceberg, a microcosm of a much bigger picture?
Well, in the report, we're talking about 8 NGOs. We think there are more, but currently we don't have the evidence yet to talk about this. So it's possible there are more. There are definitely other foundations and funds and stuff like that. That's
connected to other terror organizations.
Yes, that's definitely true, and this is not a secret. Hamas and other terrorist groups have foundations and charitable groups that work for them. This is also not new information.
Is this a problem with the monitoring mechanisms within the European countries at large, that they don't do their due diligence, or do you suspect that there's a specific blind eye that's being turned in the instance of Israel?
Well, in general, we note that there's a lack of transparency in the funding processes, meaning we don't really know how they decide. We know that they fund certain groups, and we know sometimes with Palestinian groups, we know sometimes how much money is being given, but we don't know how they decide if this group get money and this group does not. So that's actually a black hole for us, and that's also something we've been requesting for the Europeans for some time to provide us this information and have not gotten any response.
Josh Bakon from NGO Monitor, thank you.